Hello, and welcome to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast with your hosts, Russell Martin and Brent Aiken. This podcast is all about equipping, encouraging, and inspiring youth pastors weekly with topics that are brought to the table by youth pastors from all over the world. And now, here's your host for this week, Brent Aiken. Hey, welcome back to the podcast. Today, we are sitting down with someone that I guess I kind of know fairly well, and that is my wife. We are sitting down with Lesa Aiken today, and the topic is special needs in youth ministry. Now, we have been waiting and eagerly anticipating this episode for a while. It's taken a while for us to just have time to actually get this done and sit down together to do this episode due to children and schedules and everything else in between. But we think that this is a super important episode to do. So, but before we get too far, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us your what you do and anything else you want to share.
All right. So aside from being your wife, I'm a SPED teacher. I teach first grade through fourth grade kiddos. I also, before that, worked in a behavior clinic with a lot of kids with all kinds of diagnoses, including autism. We are also special needs parents, so we have a little bit of personal experience with this topic. And yeah, I've had a lot of experience and opportunities to work with really unique kids. So I have a fun perspective.
Yeah, and I think I know that you and me have talked a bunch of times about this, but I really think that it's a conversation that in a lot of circles, especially in churches, it's not even swept under the rug. It's just not in the building at all. There's just no conversation about it at all. So with that being said, what is the importance of investing in relationships with families that do have special needs as far as like the church?
I think the first and main point that it is super, super important for churches to reach out to special need families and kids is it's biblical. God made sure and was intentional about stories with special needs people being in the Bible. So Jesus reached out to, the man who couldn't walk. He reached out to the blind man. He reached out to the demon possessed person. He reached out to the person on the fringes. And if we have anybody in our society nowadays that is on the fringes or further beyond, it's the special needs community.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. And I think it's super important. So how do you go about investing on relationships that are already within your church? So maybe you know a family or two that have been in your church for a while. Maybe you're new to the area, and so you're kind of walking into this situation to where you haven't had a chance yet. But how would you go about starting to build those relationships with those families?
So the first way to build a relationship with a family is just don't be judgmental. One of the first things that drew us to the church that we're currently in is our son. I don't remember how old he was at the time, roughly 3-ish. He dropped his pants and peed right outside the front doors in the bushes the very first Sunday we visited. And not a soul stopped, not a person judged, no one made an ugly comment. And we had already done a lot of church hopping before that, trying to find a church home. And that just wasn't the reaction from everybody. Our son's pretty loud. There's a lot of things about him that could be kind of quirky, but you can either embrace those things or you can run from them. And this was a church that didn't bat an eye at the unusual, didn't make any bad comments. And that is, I think it was even on the way home, I said, yep, well, if we can do that, I think this is where we can be. We can belong here. So just making yourself, your church as a whole, accepting and inclusive is a super big first step. And if you've had a family that maybe has visited already and they haven't been back, reach out to them, ask what you could do better, have an honest conversation, because probably they're willing to come back if you listen. But they also don't want to, they don't want to be needy and they don't want to ask. They want someone to offer. It's really hard to ask. So that's a first step, I think, is being able to offer. If families are involved, asking how you can meet their needs. Come at it with like a Chick-fil-A perspective. When they come through the drive-thru, they say, Thanks for allowing me to serve you, or it was a pleasure a pleasure to serve you today, and make them feel welcome. Um, don't be bothered, don't be annoyed by their special requests or their unique needs. Just find out how to meet them.
Yeah, and I really like what you said there with the whole don't make them ask, but we should be
Mhm.
offering instead. What, just so there's a little clarity, what do you specifically mean as far as offering? Like, how do you
Um,
go about offering to those families?
yeah, so you don't have to be pushy about it. It can be a simple thing like having a few pairs of noise canceling headphones. They're like $10 at Academy. It's the same kind of headphones that are for shooter protection. Having a few pair of those cheap headphones um, right next to your bulletins, or right next to the mints that everybody picks up, or right next to the coloring sheet that all the kids grab, just so it's available. No one has to shove it at them. No one has to demand it. No one has to bring it to them and single them out. It's just available and offered. Other little things that can make a really big difference, like in a youth group, would be, you know, if that family seems really nervous about bringing, say, their autistic son upstairs or their Downs kiddo upstairs, making sure that parent knows, hey, we're going to assign them a buddy tonight, and it's going to be one of their friends, someone they're comfortable with. Don't make that parent ask, hey, can someone look out for them? You just go ahead and let them know, hey, we're going to be watching out for them tonight. Here's some extra things we can do, and just let them
Yeah.
be, yeah, let them be um, informed but not pushed.
Okay. So basically, kind of kill them with kindness
Yes.
in the sake of getting this conversation started.
Hmm.
Because I mean, I think I can speak for, and I would say that while our son is special needs, he is not um, a higher tier special need as far as like an outward appearance issue
Hmm.
that Down syndrome or sometimes autism can bring. And so even us, like just the avenue of having that comfort of, hey, no one's going to judge us. No one's going to judge when our deaf son yells at the top of his lungs to answer a question in children's church or anything like that. No one's going to judge when he literally sticks his head up to the TV so he can hear stuff like that. It's just the opportunity of he feels comfortable enough to do whatever he needs to do, even if it's pee on the bushes in the front of the church. Um, and he felt comfortable enough that he didn't care about it. He didn't worry about it. He didn't think anything of it. And of course, he was 3, but at the same time, I think that is something that transcends across the board.
Hmm.
And specifically, though, as youth pastors, we really don't gear our ministries towards this topic. We don't really gear our ministries towards including students with special needs. So this question's kind of twofold. How do we work to include them in our groups first and foremost? But then also, how do we take it a step farther than that? And how do we include them to where they're an active and ready part of the conversation that we're having within our group as well?
Hmm. Yeah, so one of the best ways to get a kid to communicate is first find out what their comfort level is. If you've got a kid who won't say a word in front of anybody, then maybe you do some written responses that night and have everybody do a note card and write one or two things down and then share everybody's, anonymously. Or maybe you assign kids to groups for little mini discussions with 2 or 3 people. That way someone else can be the speaker. Maybe that kid doesn't speak at all and they're nonverbal, but you give them an opportunity to join worship and they feel like they can dance in the background or right up front, or that they can sing and it not be on key. Or, we have, I think one of the most beautiful things in our youth group is we have a little girl, or I guess she's not little, she's a almost high school kid, and she's blind. And I think one of the best ways that she is included is she doesn't have an adult following her around. She just has a bunch of friends that include her and make sure she's never sitting by herself, that she's never playing by herself, that she's included in the game even though she might need a buddy to do it, or that we plan ahead and you guys adapt games that you make sure she can be included in. Sometimes you can plan ahead and think of those things, and sometimes you get a surprise. So maybe another thing you could do as a youth group is plan. Maybe have 1 or 2 kids assigned to, hey, if you see someone who seems like they're feeling really awkward or seems uncomfortable or whatever, the kids are going to probably notice them before an adult does. And if an adult notices, that's great. But you've got to keep in mind that a lot of those needs that kids have won't be seen. Like you said, our kid is one of the ones that, unless you really notice his hearing aid right off the bat, you may not know he's special needs. A lot of kids with autism, you wouldn't know that they're really uncomfortable in the room because the music's so loud at worship. So maybe it's just taking a moment to notice that kid and provide a room next door where they can still hear and feel the music, but it's not overwhelming. And then making sure that kid's not sitting in that room separately by themselves.
Yeah. And so I'm throwing this question right at you off the cuff because I just thought about this and I think it's a really good one for this conversation. And I think this is the thing that we all fear the most. What happens with the and not guaranteed to happen, but what happens when you do get to that point to where you have maybe an autistic kid that just gets oversensitive in worship to where they go crazy for a moment and they panic or freak out or try and go hide somewhere they can't hide. How do you
Mhm.
how do you set the bricks in place for that to be handled effectively and efficiently, maybe when you don't have specifically trained people on board for that?
Yeah, so say kids just really having a meltdown and it's a rough moment and you need to, as in school we would call it like clear the room. If it's really that bad, someone's throwing a chair, someone's hiding in a corner, something really, really tough or embarrassing is going on, take those other kids for a walk. Even if it's like, hey, we're gonna go play, frisbee outside for a little bit, game time, we're gonna go do this. You need to have a few things in your back pocket where you just know, hey, I can get a bunch of kids out of the room like this and not draw a lot of attention to this kid. Um, so yeah, the first thing and foremost is you just don't want to embarrass that kid. So clearing the room's a good idea if it's really intense. If it's not, and say they're just kind of like hiding in the corner and you can tell they're uncomfortable or they've ran out of the room and hid, have one or two people go after them. You don't want them to feel like, someone's chasing them with a pitchfork and it's a whole village that's, following them behind because that's going to be really intimidating and they're probably not going to stop running. Um, so I think play out and really one way you can be prepared for that is just discuss some of those scenarios or possibilities with your team. Even if it's one or two of those leaders in your high school group, along with a few of your adult leaders. You don't have to be specialized or have additional training to care. And you don't have to have specialized training to notice somebody. It helps. And if your church is going really above and beyond and you have one of these kids and you've had this happen a few times, it's probably time to start taking something called CPI training. It's crisis prevention training, and yes, it does have some things like um, holds and um, things like that for kids who are super severe. But it also has a whole day of just communicating about de-escalation scenarios and how you do calm that kid down outside. So if this is something that's happening regularly, it is time for your church or your staff or at least a few members to go get some training. But if not, just have that in the back of your mind and come up with a few things that you can do to not draw extra attention to that kid.
Yeah, and so CPI training is very, very useful. Most,
Mhm.
if not all, schools require it. Most, I think, a lot of daycares even require CPI training
Yeah.
if they're like full daycares and not
Mhm.
just like a Mother's Day out where it's a couple days a week. But how would a church go about finding that training? Could they be able to just go talk to a local school?
Yeah, you might be able to jump in with a local school. Often college professors or the school counselor teaches that. So if you've got a good relationship with your school, that's a good place to start. You can also sign up for the training online. So it's an in-person training, but you can sign up online and find an instructor near you. Um, so yeah, again, it's just called crisis prevention training, and it's not expensive, but it's important if that's a recurring issue. Um, and then the other thing is make sure that your team is approaching whatever is going on with all of your students with a I get to attitude instead of gosh, we have to do this attitude. Because the kid probably feels that in other settings already. Um, and so does the family. So, when you walk into a restaurant and the waiter rolls their eyes because you've got a kid that's screaming at the back table, or you had to already remove some other chairs and tables near you because you had to make room for a wheelchair, you're already feeling probably pretty defensive or frustrated right off the bat. So just making sure that you come in with the attitude of, I get to serve you. What can I do? Instead of what do we have to change or what do we have to fix to make this work? All about
Yeah.
attitude. Hmm.
Yeah. And I think it's super impactful. I mean, without going into too many details, I think one of the most impactful things you've ever told me about your involvement with school is you had a parent one time that literally had never had their kid go a full day of school,
Hmm.
and how they had always been called by the school to be like to pick up their kid, and that was like done for a first time
Hmm.
that year, and the mom just didn't know what to do. She didn't plan anything for that day. She just sat at
Yeah.
her house waiting for that phone call, and I think that's where
Hmm.
a lot of these parents sit.
Yeah.
They just expect that
Hmm.
anything and everything that can go wrong will go wrong. And so you're ministering to the parents just as much as you are the kids there,
Very much.
which is
Yeah.
important.
That's a really important thing to kind of bring up too is the parents. Some of these parents are going to want to drop and run. They are just exhausted. They need some loving care themselves and they need a moment without their kid. And other parents are going to watch you like a hawk and not trust you. And just know that it's not because you did something wrong already. It's because they've been burned a few times and they're scared. So if a parent wants to stay, let them. Let them observe in the back. It's not going to hurt anything. If it becomes a recurring issue and you can't get rid of them, then have some of those conversations. But for that first time or two, let them just know that they're accepted and that they're welcomed and that they can watch, and that way they know. They don't. You don't know what they've been through, and you don't know where the last church put them or where the last school put them. They could have had them in a room by themselves and just coloring, and they weren't a part of the group at all. But then they told them they were going to youth, and now they don't trust you. So also be again, just be really open about if they're interested and they're asking questions, make sure you're offering things too. And if you don't know what to offer, it's okay to ask, hey, what can we do? What can we do that will make you feel more comfortable? What can we do to make your kiddo or your teenager want to be here? How can we encourage them to stay? Maybe it's that first day that you just ask them to stay for 15 minutes. Maybe they're really comfortable in worship and that's something they already do on Sunday morning. So that's comfortable for them. Let them stay for worship and leave. It's okay. As long as you guys have a game plan worked out with the parents and they know and you know what the plan is, it's fine. You guys have a kiddo right now that is she in sixth grade? Is that right? A sixth, seventh grader, Brent?
Which one?
A sixth or seventh grader that is that needed a little bit of help staying in Sunday school. So, for the first 10 or 15 minutes, you
Oh
guys
yeah,
included her in Sunday
sixth grade.
school. Yeah. She is a sweetheart, but her attention span just isn't quite there yet. So before she felt comfortable, they did maybe 10 or 15 minutes. And then the associate youth pastor or Brent, they stepped out for a bit and they went and played foosball next door. It didn't bother anybody. She still got to be a part of the conversation, but when she was checked out and done, they gave her that option to be done. And then slowly, every week, they tacked on 3 to 5 minutes until she's staying through Sunday school, and then they still get to go play foosball right before they head downstairs. But now she can be a part of the whole group. Um, it might take a little bit of time where you ease them into that experience because they may not have had the opportunity to be involved in a small group before or a big group with worship. So just be mindful of that because you might be their first one. Make it a really good experience so they want to come back.
Well, and also never underestimate the power of a coloring book.
Mm-hmm.
Um, give them a junior legal pad, give them a little spiral notebook, give them a coloring book, figure out
Mm-hmm.
what their favorite thing to color is.
Yeah.
And just have that as an option available upstairs. They might not use it every week, but
Yeah.
having that option is just another way of not only you showing that you're prepared, but
Mm-hmm.
then also it just bumps up the comfort level of the parents saying, look, wow, they actually thought this through. They actually asked about what their favorite thing to color was or what
Mm-hmm.
their favorite thing to draw was. Or maybe, do you like crayons or markers? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
most people would probably jump to crayons or colored pencils because markers mark
Mm-hmm.
things. And a lot of times we don't want things marked on, but even just asking and having that opportunity to show that you're not only involved in the conversation, but you're researching interest, researching likes, finding the way to get them as involved as possible.
Yeah.
And that
And
goes across the board.
yeah, and if you've got a kid who really benefits from that and you're a little bit worried about providing those tools and it looking too childish, map colors or, the color pencils are really safe, and so are gel pens. Those really don't have an age attached to them. Um, Colors, if you've got a senior high kiddo and you offer them a box of crayons, they might snub at that. But I feel like color pencils and gel pens are pretty age appropriate for all groups. So is a blank sketch pad. So if you don't want a Paw Patrol coloring book out there, it's okay. If you find out a kid wants a Paw Patrol coloring book, go get them one. But if not, just have a blank sketch pad. It's fine. And it might be really nice to see that some of the other kids might want to use those materials too, and that's okay. Then you become inclusive, and they're not the only ones. So maybe even encourage that. Definitely don't just be like, oh no, these are just for the special kids and you can't touch this stuff. Like, make it available for everybody. Then no one feels awkward about needing it.
Yeah, I
Hmm.
definitely agree. And the thing is with this conversation, we could go into a lot more detail, and I might actually get to the point to where we write a blog or two about
Hmm.
some more in-depth things that not necessarily come into this conversation. But if you do have those kids in your group, how to manage your time and your energy with them more effectively,
Hmm.
and how to work with them and have them as involved and engaged as possible, because that
Hmm.
very much depends on the um, level of disability or level of
Hmm.
impairment. But there's so much more you can do that we probably don't have time to touch on in this conversation.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
Oh, you were talking. I'm going to backtrack for just a little bit. When you were talking about that kid shutting down or just really struggling, one of the best ways to pull a kid out that's struggling is sitting right next to them and doing art and like leaving a blank spiral next to them. Especially if they can communicate by writing notes, that's a really good way to pass back and forth notes to calm somebody down. It doesn't require verbal communication. That might be something really awkward for them. It might just be a couple doodles and they like draw their mom and they're ready to go home. Like, that's okay. Another one of those things is to give kids choices. So don't die on the little hill. If you are so excited and you're really, it's just like a kid's first time upstairs, or that they're struggling that night, don't make them sit in the chair with everybody else. If they want to sit on the floor, okay, it's not going to hurt anybody. It's always good to maybe offer those choices ahead of time so that you can offer two choices that you were both okay with. Um, but if you don't have that opportunity, it's a really good way to pull someone out of behavior that's maladaptive or um, that's making other people struggle as well around them. It could be as simple as, hey, it looks like you need a break. Do you want to take a walk with this person, or would you rather hang here in the back and us chat for a little bit? What would be better for you? And making sure not calling them out in front of the group, just like you wouldn't with any other kid. If at all possible, avoid singling them out.
Yeah, and something that to kind of even take it more from the school perspective of, hey, do you want to go take a walk real quick? One thing that I've done a few times now is it's like, hey, I need to go grab this out of fill in the blank here. The
Hmm.
farthest room away from our youth area is the kitchen. And so I'll be like, hey, I need to go grab a spoon from the kitchen. Do you want to walk with me?
Hmm.
And then they feel not only like they have the opportunity to get out, but they also feel like you have chose them to do a
Yep.
task with them, and that just includes the involvement and keeps them engaged in some light. And most of the
Right.
time that will allow opportunity for cool off. That will allow opportunity for them kind of diffusing.
Hmm.
And then the other thing is just, at least in my perspective, is be vocal. Be
Hmm.
like, hey, I understand you're super upset right now, and your voice level is really really high. We're like two rooms away from the kitchen. By the time we get to the kitchen, let's calm down, okay?
Hmm.
And so that
Yeah.
gives them an opportunity to kind of fade out
Hmm.
instead of just abruptly stopping.
Right. And telling them not to overreact or calm down. I don't know if you've ever been told to calm down when you're really upset about a situation, but sometimes that's not the most calming thing. So even small things like, hey, can you match my voice for a bit? I'm not yelling. Could you stop yelling? Um, I know that sounds very teacher-esque, but it is what it is, and we use it because it works. um, so just letting kids know, try not to use those buzzwords of, you know, um, you're messing up, or calm down, it's not a big deal, because to them it might be a big deal. Maybe someone stepped on their favorite toy and you didn't know they brought it, or maybe this is the longest time they've ever been without their mom or their aide at school. Maybe this is the first time that they've been offered whatever food you had that night and it wasn't pizza and they thought that was the plan. um, Big thing, if you've got a kid on the spectrum who is very rigid by schedule, you need to write down a schedule for them, and just, even if you had it posted somewhere or even if you wrote it down that night, and if it's going to change, give them a heads up. Because that's going to maybe rock some kids' world. um, and just notice and know your kids. That's going to take some time, and again, you can't do all those things the first night, but you can be taking notes that first night to make the next night even better.
Yeah, and like you said, it's a gradual increase on what you can
Hmm.
provide. You
Yep.
don't need to go 120% the first night, because you are going to freak that kid out. You are going to probably freak yourself out in the
Hmm.
process of just being overwhelmed with all the things that you thought you might need to do or you may need to do. And then also it's going to really, really look like you pulled away from the rest of the group because you have so much concentration and attention and effort towards this one kid.
Yeah.
So gradual progression is perfectly fine.
Yeah, like, I would even put together, you guys don't need to go buy, a couple $100 worth of CPI training the first night. You guys might need to spend $10 on, like, a little toolbox that's ready to go with a pack of gel pens, a sketchbook, maybe some pipe cleaners so they have something to fidget with, maybe a fidget spinner, and some Play-Doh or some putty that's like in the little egg shape. They come in packs of like 4 or 5 for $5 from Walmart. Some of them smell funny, some of them are regular, some of them glow in the dark. I mean, cheap stuff. These are like dollar store items that you can have in a box ready to go that are available for whoever. And that way, if someone does walk in, you've got some tools to pull out. And you're not just, frantic and running to your children's pastor and being like, please, please help me. Is there Play Doh? You don't want to do that the night of.
Yeah, no, definitely. Be prepared as much as you can.
Hmm.
And it's just like having a go bag for anything else. I mean, this is
Hmm.
your go bag for if this happens or if the student walks in the door. This is
Hmm.
how you handle and that's where you really start taking notes as you allow them to start playing, and then you're like, okay, well, this is what caused them to get upset. This is how they got upset. This is when they calmed down. This seemed to really, really calm them down.
Hmm.
Sometimes maybe it's a walk. Sometimes maybe you just sit and talk with them and pull them away from the rest of the group. There's so many different things that you can just observe and take notes on.
Yeah. I think one of the other perfect examples is having some open communication with the parents when they're ready. I know we've had another youth student before that just wandered off one afternoon or evening after youth, and it scared everybody. He was missing for a good half hour, and we were panicked. Um, Turns out he does that a lot. He scales fences, he takes off. If he's scared, he runs or he walks away to what he thinks might be a familiar spot. And if it had been one of those 5-minute parent conversations of like, hey, I noticed that we did really good with this. What can we work on? Or is there anything I should be aware of? Leaving that door open to, they may not tell you the first night that they run away. They might be scared that you're not ever going to let them come back to youth. But if you keep having that open dialogue and it's not all negative, if you can tell that parent some really good things that happened that night, they're going to be a lot more excited to tell you about their kid and be open. And that's when you get the things like, hey, sometimes they run away, or if he goes to the bathroom and someone else walks in the bathroom too, he might hit them because he's scared. Or um, you might find out that he doesn't want you to touch his back or pat him, or he doesn't like that loud song because it scares him. You're going to hear those things from parents too. It really just depends on, again, their functioning level and how involved the parents are. But leave that doorway open, because it can be a really good asset to not be surprised by some of those things.
Well, and once again, that's a gateway right into ministering to the parents too.
Hmm.
You have to have an open line of communication with them so they feel comfortable that they can talk to you. And
Hmm.
then not only will they start telling you about their kid, they'll more than likely also start telling you, hey, this um this happened at school today.
Hmm.
Or hey, dad had to leave. Dad's gonna get deployed in 3 months and he's gonna
Hmm.
be gone for 6 months.
Hmm.
And I think this is really probably going to affect him, especially with the use that we so heavily use of father. Since we talk about God being our father, uh,
Hmm.
there's trigger words, And sometimes we have to even think through stuff like that. But parents and their comfort level will allow them to have that comfort with you and share those details. And the more details you can get from parents, the better. It's going to prep you. It's going to give them comfort. And hopefully it's going to make the whole thing work better in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Very true.
So for those, and this is kind of shifting the conversation. We've talked about churches that do have special needs. Maybe you're a small church and you don't have any specific people in your church that you can point out and say, oh, well, we do have these 2 special needs families, or we do have this one kid that's autistic or whatever, but it is guaranteed that you have special needs in your community. So for the church or the youth group that does not have special needs students in their program, how do you go out and support the community? How do you reach out to the families that have special needs in the community?
Yeah, I think that first step is not sweeping it out the door and acknowledging that there are special needs families in your community. In fact, it is there's a statistic from the census from about 10 years ago in the US, so I'm sure it's higher now. 1 in 5 people in the US have a disability of some sort. Now, that does include older people and dementia and all kinds of things that are outside of teen and child age. But just know that those families, even if you're a community of 2,000 to 5,000, they're out there. And you may know who they are and you may not. If you don't know any, you need to start reaching out and doing some things differently. One of those first things that you can do is have like a sensory friendly, if you have like a church Halloween get together, say that there's a big crowd that comes on Halloween night and it's super crazy and you've got a few hundred people there and you hand out candy and it's a big thing. It would cost almost nothing if you set up the day before anyways to prepare for it, and you have just a few people just post that you have a sensory friendly Halloween party or a festival, and that way those kids that can't do the hundreds of people around or can't do the noise level or aren't going to dress up but aren't sure about everybody else wearing costumes and things like that, those kids have just an hour. You've already got the room set up. Maybe invite a few kids that aren't going to do well in that setting. If you don't know any of them, post it on Facebook. Share it with your school. Even if they just give it to your SPED director or your SPED teacher, most of the time schools are pretty closed off about taking things from churches. I hear you. But if you contact a SPED teacher locally and let them know that you have something prepared for their kids and that you would love to welcome their families, it doesn't matter if no one shows up. It matters that they got invited. So little things like that.
Very much. We haven't done it in a few years because COVID kind of killed it. But we hosted I don't even know really what to call it. What did we end up calling it?
Yeah, I think it was like a mini
kangaroo camp. That's
yeah,
what it was.
That's what it was. Yeah.
We ended up doing something just that we called kangaroo camp. And our church has a few inflatables. And we just basically had an opportunity that was 100% special needs kids. We partnered with a local autism clinic. It was actually when my wife was still working there. We partnered with them and had a few of their therapists come out and help with some of the more severely disabled children. But we let them have a day where they got to jump on bouncy castles. They got to make different snacks. It was almost like a vacation Bible school day for special needs kids.
Yep.
And that was all that was there. And then the other really cool part about it is we threw our youth kids into the mix, and we had all of our youth kids. I think we did, particularly for this instance, I think we did gear it for high school to where we allowed the high school to help. And we just allowed our high school to come in and we let them be group guides. We helped them lead games. We helped them lead snacks. And we gave them a little bit of training in the beginning of, hey, this might happen. Like you might put this tray of like a couple different foods that they're supposed to put together and like make this statue or something. They might look at it and they might dump it. They might throw it at you. I mean, who knows? But like, we want you to be prepared so you don't freak out about it.
Mhm.
And so just having those different opportunities, honestly, kangaroo camp was one of the coolest things I've ever done. And the feedback and the return from the kids and the parents that came
Mhm.
was awesome. Like I said, we had to stop because of COVID, and we
Yeah.
haven't kicked that back up. And it might be something that we potentially look at restarting in the
Mhm.
future. But it was something that was genuinely um, both sides of the conversation, from the
Mhm.
students and the parents that attended it. They all had really, really good remarks, and they all loved it that their kids were being involved and they were having fun in an
Mhm.
atmosphere that was safe for them. But then all the adult and student volunteers from our youth group and our church that came and helped too, they were
Yeah.
absolutely just blown away with the opportunity, because it's an
Yeah.
opportunity that you don't get very often.
And I think we had less than like 15 kids to come to that, but I am almost positive that none of them had ever been to a VBS before. None of their parents were brave enough or felt comfortable enough to do that. So, yeah, start looking in your community, partner with those people that are doing pediatrics, whether it be therapy. If you have an occupational therapist in your church, or a physical therapist, or a speech pathologist, or a special ed teacher, it's okay to start communicating. If you don't have any sped kids in your church, or you don't have any special needs families that are even on your radar, start asking them questions. Where can we find some people that might be looking for a church home? How can we support the ones that are already here? Chances are those professionals that already work in that industry, at very least, they will train you guys. And if they don't train you, they might be involved in the yourself. Um, Not only that, they might be available for that kid that does walk in, and surprise, you get a day that you didn't know someone was coming and they could be on call. Maybe you can go steal them from Bible study for the day, and you're not asking them to volunteer every single Wednesday night, and they say, I do that all day, I can't do it all night too.
Definitely.
Just let them know, like, hey, could you be that person on call for an emergency? If I don't know what to do and a kiddo shows up, could you just come help shadow them for the evening? Um,
Yeah.
Again, that's planning ahead and reaching out ahead of time. Probably you've got
Well,
someone in your church that works with kids that
yeah.
have special
And
needs
more than
already.
likely, they would also be willing to help you do a plan of action for the next
Mhm.
couple visits following.
Yes.
Especially if you're like, hey, I don't want you to be the person that is following them for the next 6 months.
Mhm.
But if you say, hey, this is not my expertise. This is something that I want to be as compassionate and as graceful as possible in, but I
Mhm.
genuinely have no idea what I'm doing. Can you
Sure.
help me?
Mhm.
When you ask them to help and not lead, they
Mhm.
will more than likely say yes,
Yes.
because they have a heart for the kids that they teach or they do therapy for. They don't do it just because it's there.
Mhm.
Like, normally when you go into that field, you have a heart for those people, and they're more than likely willing to help if they're asked. They do not want to be the servant of that student because they probably already have them at school. But they will more than likely be okay with helping develop a plan,
Mhm.
shadowing, and they'll give you some great insight too,
Mhm.
because they are trained to know what to look for.
Mhm.
Um, and that trained eye can be, it can save a bunch of potential headaches for sure.
Mhm. Yeah, something else to consider is that even if you've got that team of people on staff or within your church body, um, maybe they don't want to help set up every night, and maybe they don't even want to be there for an emergency, but maybe they would stick out a stack of flyers at their place of work, of some kind of community event that you host for families with special needs. Even if it's a dinner, you could host a mini dinner with spaghetti and hot dogs or whatever very bland food you choose, just in case. Um, and make sure that families just feel invited and welcome. Um, and that can be a really big help too. Just the main thing is, if you don't take away anything else from this conversation, if you have no special needs families in your church, you're missing them. They're somewhere, they're just not with you guys.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the thing is I think largely the reason that this is such a swept under the rug topic or not even mentioned topic is because it's really fear of the unknown. You don't know how to handle them. You don't know how they will react. You don't know how your church will react.
Yep.
And it's one of those what if scenarios that is never really addressed because it honestly seems too daunting. And it is genuinely if you genuinely put the effort and the resources towards it, not only will it be an incredibly beneficial thing for you and your ministry, but it'll also be a beneficial thing for your church too, because the churches that embrace special needs, your entire church and community or your congregation is getting behind those kids because they're the ones that are okay with the kid that is too loud in church. They're okay. They're the ones that are okay with the Down syndrome kid that like just randomly like walks around the sanctuary while church is happening.
Or the kid up front that's dancing, and that's okay. There's a lot of different things that might happen. And it's fine. Just keep in mind that when Jesus was on earth, he did not flock to those easy people. He flocked to those people that were standing out. He flocked to the people that no one else was flocking to. So just make sure as a church body, you're following that example. And once you have that down and your youth group is including special needs kids, what better way to be the hands and feet of Christ than to be able to teach your congregation how to do the same thing?
Yeah, without a doubt.
Yep.
So outside of this conversation, do you have any resources or websites that they could go to get help? Anything in particular? I'll throw the crisis intervention training information in the show notes of this when this posts. Yep. But is there anything else?
Yeah, like aside from reaching out to your local physical therapist, occupational therapist, and speech therapist or SPED teachers in your church already, I have a favorite person that I follow on TikTok, and Brent's probably gonna laugh at this, but Mr. Monroe and Nala, they are like 10-second to 1-minute conversations from the perspective of the student on how he handles power struggles or behaviors, or even needs of low SES kids or kids that are struggling with like not having enough to eat or didn't get enough sleep that night or their parents were up arguing. Lots of different things, including special needs, that he covers on just how to de-escalate so quickly and so gracefully. I don't think you'll find a better example, and he has a ton of videos. So that is called Mr. Monroe and Nala. And I think he's on TikTok and Facebook.
He's on TikTok and Instagram. I will throw both of those links. Yep. I have personally watched almost all of his videos, and they are absolutely captivating as far as videos go, because it is a breath of fresh air with how things are normally handled, I guess. Because he does such a fresh approach, and realistically none of it is like incredibly difficult, but he has a great way of addressing so many different topics and issues. And honestly, not even all of them are special needs related. You could probably learn how to handle the rowdy children in your ministry with some of these as well. But Mr. Monroe and Nala will put his Instagram and his his TikTok in the show notes as well.
Yep. One last thing. I think you should totally share the story about C and hand signals if you haven't already. Have you done that yet?
I guess not.
Nope. Okay, like your hand signal for sarcasm.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yep. So we have a kiddo. Yeah, you go ahead.
No, it's fine. You're the guest. You're supposed to be talking, not me.
Okay. Well, I will be guestly. So we have this kiddo, and he is definitely on the spectrum. I'm going to call him C so we don't give out his identity. But he started our youth group when he was in junior high, and he really struggles with social situations. He takes everything with 100% seriousness. If you told him that the chair behind him was on fire, he would probably run and not look back. So sarcasm was a really tricky thing. And I don't know if you guys have heard Brent talk much, but he's pretty sarcastic, and so are youth. Teenagers are known for throwing the sarcasm around like crazy. So every time he viewed a situation as threatening or frustrating or serious when it was really just a joke, he was all up in arms and really frustrated and upset about the situation. And really just didn't know what to do. So Brent came up with a solution where he just came up with a hand gesture to let C know that if he was in a conversation and it was sarcastic and not truthful, what was your gesture? Do you remember?
I would poke my chin.
Yeah, just like poke his chin. So that way he knew, hey, this is sarcasm, like warning, without holding up a big sarcasm sign and embarrassing him in front of everybody. He let him be part of the conversation and just with a really minor signal, gave him a heads up that that conversation was sarcastic and not really, no one was in danger, no one was hurt, no one's feelings were really hurt or upset. And that was just a really graceful way. If you can think about incorporating things like hand signals instead of calling kids out, do it. That
Yeah.
way, learning doesn't stop. You don't have to, the train doesn't have to halt to get that kid's attention, but also that gives them just a little VIP feeling of this person cared enough to let me know a different way and didn't want to call me out and embarrass me. And that matters so much. This kid still comes every week. He's super involved. He's in high school. And I think we'll continue to have him until he graduates. And he has been a challenge, but also a blessing to our youth group. And I think a lot of kids have learned um, a lot from him.
Yeah.
And they've very much learned how to be inclusive, how to make sure they're not bullying someone even by accident, how to just talk and let someone be involved in the space even if what they're contributing doesn't match what they're saying. Just again being an example, and Brent leading by example with that gesture, and being so inclusive with that student definitely set the stage with how inclusive our youth kids were with the same student.
Yeah. And now I don't do the signal anymore. I haven't done it in probably 3 or 4 years. But he picks it up now. He knows, and he learned from that process and from being around sarcasm and like having that, okay, this is sarcasm. Now he picks it up and he readily contributes to the sarcasm too, which is great. So like you said, the learning doesn't have to stop. It gave him an opportunity. It gave him a window to where he could be in on something that he didn't completely understand. And now he does understand it, and he can throw sarcasm just as well as anybody else in the youth group. But it all came from one small inclusion. Yeah, it's a life skill.
It's a life skill to pick up on sarcasm. So that is one thing that, I'm sure he's heard plenty about Jesus at youth too, but it's okay if he takes away something else. That's a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. So obviously, like we said, I've been looking forward to this conversation for a really, really long time. Not just because you're the guest, but I mean, that was pretty awesome too. But just also to the nature of special needs. I mean, this is something that I've been really looking forward to because it is that conversation that doesn't really happen very often. And I know that it is a conversation that when we go to National Youth Workers Conventions or anything else, if we ever see a topic in the breakout sessions for this, either you or me are there, because it's one of those conversations that we're eager to have. We're eager to learn as much as we can, but they are far apart from each other. There's not very many, and even at the huge like 50 breakout conventions, there might be one or two that have anything to do with special needs out of the 50 or so that are actually being presented that at that conference. And so we wanted to bring this conversation to the table. It's super, super important. How can people connect with you? Maybe they have some questions that spark up about this. Obviously, you're welcome to message me or just message us by going to Talk Student Men on Facebook or Instagram, and you can direct message us. But if they want to connect with you personally to ask those questions, how can they interact with you?
They can use my email, but I'm going to spell it because my name's spelled all wrong. It's LesaAiken@gmail.com. You're welcome to share questions and I will get back with you. And we can exchange information from there if you need more help or just more insight.
Yeah. Well, once again, thank you for finally allowing us to get this conversation done. Like I said, schedules and us both having the same kids and having to have a opportunity for us to be away from our kids. It's bedtime right now, which is why this is getting recorded. But thank you for being on the show. Thank you for being willing to have this conversation that's really, really needed in the culture and society that we live in, because there are so many special needs students in all of our towns and communities that really have nowhere to go because no one's looking for them. So that's our challenge to you as we leave this. Hopefully this leaves you inspired. Hopefully this leaves you encouraged. And hopefully this leaves you with the challenge of wanting to get out there and find those students. If this brings questions, please reach out to us. We'd love to answer anything and everything we can. And like I said, we might continue on this with a few blog posts down the road as well, just because there's so much that we can talk about when it comes to this topic. But until next time, we will catch you guys later. Y'all have a great rest of your week.
Yep. Thanks for having me.